When a company has been around as long as the Pokemon Company has been, eventually you're bound to have some controversies. That is why in this video we are going over the 15 biggest controversies in Pokemon. And we're better to start with the Pokemon Jinx, an extremely controversial Pokemon due to the fact it has resemblances to negative stereotypes towards black people. Jinx's design appears to resemble that of the characters from Little Black Sambo, which in itself has been an incredibly controversial book since the mid to late 20th century. The book was first released in 1899, and throughout the near 100 years between the publishing of this book and the creation of Jinx, you would think that the Pokemon Company would have thought a bit more about copying a design from such a controversial book. In at number 14, we have the Electric Soldier Porygon episode of the Pokemon anime. This episode's story has become synonymous with Pokemon controversies, and even today, almost 25 years after the episode aired in Japan, people still talk about it. In Electric Soldier Porygon, Pikachu has to use Thunderbolt to stop a deadly computer virus, and this led to immense flashing lights between red and blue colors. This is what would lead to 10% of viewers experiencing headaches and migraines, while another huge percentage would experience seizures, unconsciousness, and sometimes even temporary blindness. This event led to 685 children throughout Japan being hospitalized.
British television applies regulations to weed out dangerous flicker, typically caused by rapid contrasts, black on white, white on black.
1 child in 200 in this age group of 5 to 20 is what's called photosensitive. That means that if a child is photosensitive, flashing lights at a certain rate, most commonly between 10 and 20 flashes per second, may precipitate an epileptic seizure.
It's actually what potentially led to the name change from Pocket Monsters to Pokemon, since the West had also publicized this news. So to avoid negative press, Pocket Monsters was renamed to Pokemon in the West. Next up, we have the Legend of Dratini episode of the Pokemon anime. The episode was an absolute fever dream to watch when researching for this video. The basic plot is simple. Ash gets challenged by Team Rocket to catch as many Pokemon as possible within the Safari Zone, with Ash catching his 30 Tauros in this episode. Team Rocket manages to get the drop on the Safari Game Warden to give up the location of a Dratini. In the end, they all see the Dratini. But this does not seem that controversial, right? Well, I may have missed out some minor details. For starters, the game leader's name is Kaiser, which for anyone who is not clued in on German politics, the Kaiser is essentially the monarch within Germany, the head of state perhaps being a more fitting term. And at one point in this episode, Kaiser actually points a gun at Ash's head. Allegedly, there is also a reference to Hitler, since during an interrogation scene in the episode, Meowth puts on a fake mustache that multiple sources say is a reference to Hitler. Clearly not the best choice for the Pokemon Company. Interestingly, this is also the first episode that was ever banned internationally, although only 3 episodes later we would get Electric Soldier Porygon. Now let's talk about one other controversy that I have actually spoken about before. The 1999 Burger King Pokemon collaboration, which led to the death of a young child. Back in 1999, toys coming in meals was huge, from the Happy Meal at McDonald's to Burger King's own spin on things. However, when Burger King and Pokemon collaborated together, evidently no one from health and safety looked at this product. The product was a Pokeball that would have a top and bottom half that were connected and could not be separated. This is of course what led to this child's unfortunate passing, as they covered their nose and mouth with the Pokeball and were unable to breathe. This was a PR nightmare for the Pokemon Company, and they even tried to recall all the Pokeballs in exchange for fries. But at this point, the damage was already done, and their reputation was forever tainted by this disastrous campaign. Pokemon cards are back as a main staple of the Pokemon Company, seeing levels of hype close to what they were back in the 90s. However, during the coronavirus pandemic, there was a distinct shortage of Pokemon cards, with people unable to go to a nearby Target and pick up these Pokemon cards. This was because scalpers were coming in and picking up all available stock of Pokemon cards so they could sell them on at a higher price. This led to a lot of aggression and violence when people were shopping for these new Pokemon sets.
Shoppers at a Brookfield Target were forced to run and hide after a fight this morning in the parking lot.
Police say it all started with a disagreement over trading cards. Cassie Williams is live with more on why this may have happened.
Just 20 minutes after sales began this morning, things got physical.
I have a Charizard of this. I just can't find it right now.
8-year-old Mason likes collecting cards, but his mom has trouble finding them.
It's kind of sad that there's a lot of kids that are that enjoy opening the packs and looking at them and seeing what you get. They can't even really do that because you can't find them.
Everyone started running.
I'm like, what happened? What happened? And they're like, we don't know. We don't know.
Hearing something about a fight and a gun. Brookfield police say a 35-year-old man was physically assaulted by 4 other men in the parking lot after an argument over trading cards. The victim pulled out the gun he was legally carrying, and the 4 attackers ran away. Jeff Lemieux at Jeff Sports says the craze all started with the pandemic.
When COVID hit, people were just bored. Didn't have anything to do.
Lemieux has limited how many cards people can buy at his store.
As a result of this, Target temporarily pulled all trading cards from their shelves. Pokemon's answer to this was to reprint some of these sets, and of course this caused a huge drop in the value of these cards, with a lot of them halving almost overnight. One organization that is certainly a thorn in the side of the general public is PETA, or the People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, a highly controversial group that stands for good treatment of animals and will resolve to incredibly radical and often false doctrines about what is the wrong and what is the right way to treat an animal. But where does this organization fit in with Pokemon? Well, PETA believes that Pokemon promotes animal cruelty, and when Black and White 2 were released, PETA created a parody game called Black and Blue to try and get their point across. Their argument was incredibly ridiculous, as this is what they had to say. The amount of time that Pokemon spend stuffed in Pokeballs is akin to how elephants are chained up in train carts, waiting to be let out to perform in circuses. But the difference between real life and this fictional world full of organized animal fighting is that Pokemon games paint rosy pictures of things that are actually horrible. Ah, yes, because when I look at a Pokemon like Trubbish, my first thought is obviously to go and dropkick a puppy. Years later on from this statement, PETA would declare that all of their offices were Pokemon Go safe zones, and that no one would be allowed to capture or fight their Pokemon in the building. PETA, seriously? While we're on the topic of people completely misinterpreting Pokemon, let's talk about Satanic Panic. Satanic Panic is not a new thing and has been around for decades, with people calling everything from Dungeons and Dragons to the Smurfs a way of summoning demons. Yeah, I know the Smurfs did actually have this happen. However, Pokemon's case is a bit more interesting. When Pokemania was at its peak in the West during the late 90s and early 2000s, people were adamant that Pokemon portrayed values that opposed Christianity and therefore were a front for Satanism. We're talking things like Pokemon evolution and the ability to throw Pokeballs and summon Pokemon.
So Pokemon is a game that teaches children how to enter into the world of witchcraft, how to cast spells, how to use psychic phenomena, how to put to work supernatural powers against their enemies, how to fantasy role play. Pokemon world is a world of the demonic.
Do people seriously not understand that video games are not real? There was a quote by a Florida-based pastor by the name of Eugene Walton who claimed this: "You get all these potions and witchcraft, and the idea is to try and control other people." Did Pastor Walton ever even play a Pokemon game, or did he just Google one of the mechanics within the game? Why does he not mention that you can breed Pokemon without marrying them together first? Now that is outrageous. We've not spoken about a banned Pokemon card in a while, so let's look into the story of Uri Geller a bit more. In 1999, a psychic named Uri Geller sues Pokemon for using his likeness to create the Pokemon we in the West know as Kadabra. In the East, Kadabra's name is Yungara, which isn't that far off of Uri Geller, and also because of Kadabra's spoon, which was a constant act done by Uri Geller whenever he would try and bend spoons. Geller also claimed that the markings on Kadabra's head portrayed Nazism, and therefore he did not want Pokemon to ever use the Pokemon in any promotional material, since he felt they had turned him into an evil occult Pokemon character. Uri Geller sued the Pokemon Company for millions, and so the Pokemon Company decided they would not use Kadabra in any promotional materials, and this lasted for over 20 years. However, in 2020, Uri Geller had a change of heart due to the amount of complaints he had received from Pokemon fans who wanted to see Kadabra come back. Geller apologized for all of the lawsuits, most of which have been dismissed, and lifted the ban on Pokemon's use of Kadabra. So at least this story has a happy ending. Let's talk about the many controversies of Pokemon Go, and more explicitly the location of certain Pokestops. Now, Pokemon Go is going to take up the next 2 spots on the list, since there are 2 things I want to talk about that are both related to Pokemon Go. But first of all, the locations of Pokestops. Pokestops are a fundamental aspect of Pokemon Go, being the way you attain items such as Pokeballs and berries. When Pokemon Go was skyrocketing in popularity after release, people started to question some of the landmarks that Niantic had decided to transform into Pokestops. Most notably, locations such as the Holocaust Memorial Museum, the Pentagon, the Church of Scientology, and literally random civilian houses. Niantic had allowed some of these controversial and bizarre locations to be turned into Pokestops, and countless people complained about people breaking into their back garden or trying to catch Pokemon in the Holocaust Memorial Museum. But boys, we are not done yet with Pokemon Go, as we go into number 6 on this list, which is the current state of Pokemon Go. Pokemon Go's initial popularity has died down, however it is still quite popular. But is Pokemon Go dying? Well, yes. With some of the recent choices Niantic has made, it seems the state of Pokemon Go is immensely fragile. Pokemon Go is currently being slashed by fans with changes such as price increase to remote raid passes. Remote raid passes would allow players to partake in raids from their own home, and were introduced in 2020 at the height of the COVID lockdown rules instated across the world. Remote raiding had just become the norm for Pokemon Go, so when Niantic announced the changes they were making to remote raid passes, people were outraged and threw it back in Niantic's face, practically begging them not to make these changes. However, Niantic would not listen to the community and decided to implement the changes anyway, in an attempt to make more money. Now this did not work for them, as in May 2023, Pokemon Go had its most unsuccessful month in 5 years, which is insane. Me and my partners still play Pokemon Go occasionally, and we are now at the point of talking about when the game will eventually be canned by Pokemon, and I honestly can't see the game lasting much longer. Pokemon as a franchise now has well over 1,000 creatures to collect, really adding to the gotta catch 'em all tagline, right? Well, no. As we talk about the next controversy that the Pokemon company had to deal with, Dexit. While yes, not the official term in Generation 8's Pokemon game Sword and Shield, in an attempt to try and reduce the amount of 3D modules required for the games, Pokemon announced there would be no national Dex in Pokemon, essentially writing hundreds of Pokemon out of the game, and people were not happy. This was right around the time that Pokemon Home was being released, and as such, people were excited to bring their Pokemon into the Nintendo Switch for another brand new adventure. But now countless Pokemon could not be brought into Sword and Shield, and people were outraged. Dexit began trending on Twitter, which is kind of funny given this was the same time as Brexit in the United Kingdom, and of course Gallo was set in the UK. So to the fan that began this trend and hashtag, well done. Before we get into the top 3, let's talk about another incredibly stupid controversy that some people genuinely seem to care about. The Pokemon Game Corner was a staple within the older Pokemon games, and were basically a fate slot machine / gambling simulation where players could win exclusive Pokemon like Dratini and Porygon. Now, this was before the time where people had genuine concern over gambling addiction and how bad it truly is. But the argument put forth by the boards who control things like age ratings for games is that any game that shows gambling needs to be rated according to that. In the UK, the grading system is called PEGI, who rate all video games, and they told the Pokemon company that if they include the Game Corner in their games, the Pokemon games would be rated 18+. Seriously. Imagine an 18+ or R-rated Pokemon game. I genuinely could not imagine Pikachu carrying around an AR, shouting swear words, drinking alcohol, and gambling. Finally, the top 3. If you guys have watched this far, come on, subscribe. I'm not asking again. Right, let's keep going. Let's go back to Pokemon Go quickly and talk about some of the controversies that could be attributed to Pokemon Go, but not directly Pokemon's fault. When Pokemon Go was at its highest usage, criminal organizations had figured out they could use Pokemon Go hotspots to target individuals who would have things like cell phones, cameras, power banks, wallets, and more. Individuals would hang around these locations late at night and wait for people to come by to get the Pokestop or gym. Just watch this to understand more.
He's just a lazy Pokemon player. Take it off. No, please. Take it off.
It took this man 2 minutes and 40 seconds to realize what was going on when he swiftly factory reset the phone. But hopefully the live stream was enough to show the police, and thank God Ricky was not more seriously injured during this. This was unfortunately very common for Pokemon Go, and they would put out multiple warnings to fans to be aware of their surroundings when playing the game. Now let's talk about the Pokemon anime for this second spot as we discuss the removal of Brock from the Pokemon anime. Back during Kanto and Johto, the trio of Ash, Mystery, and Brock were untoppable. They were truly the best trio I would argue Pokemon ever had. However, the Pokemon company made an incredibly bizarre decision to remove Brock after the Kanto series and replace him with Tracy Sketcher. This was done because the Pokemon company were worried that Brock was a racial stereotype and therefore could be censored in the West. But people didn't care. They did not think about that kind of stuff given how likable and engaging of a character Brock was, and when they got rid of him for Tracy, it just made the absence of Brock so much more noticeable since Tracy was not very well received. Pokemon censored themselves before the West or 4Kids could do it for them. Pokemon's final controversy that we will discuss today is the Saudi Arabia banning of Pokemon. But to talk about this, we need to explain some more in-depth aspects. Pokemon has the habit of angering a lot of different religions, partially due to the way it portrays things like evolution and I guess witchcraft with potions and whatnot. However, sometimes the lengths these different religions go to try and shun Pokemon is a bit ridiculous. So let's talk about the other 2 Abrahamic religions. Firstly, let's talk about Judaism and talk about the 2 biggest aspects that offended the Jewish community. One goldback card I have actually spoken about before seems to depict a swastika on the card, and of course, the Jewish community were not happy with this. However, it was most likely the Japanese community trying to reclaim a symbol that had been tarnished by time. The Manji, as it's called, is a symbol of good luck, and it was around for centuries before the Nazis took it for their own selfish methodology. However, another aspect of Pokemon that concerned the Jewish community was, again, Kadabra, believing that the squiggly lines on its stomach were the representative of the symbol of the SS, which is a bit more of a stretch than the Manji on the goldback card. Now, the Jewish community may have made one leap, but that is nothing compared to Saudi Arabia, who made the choice to ban Pokemon entirely for 3 main reasons. First of all, they believed that Pokemon meant I am Jewish, which, disclaimer, it definitely does not. They then also felt that the game was filled with Stars of David. Again, it's definitely not. And then that it promoted gambling, which is a violation of Islamic law, which is a bit more true. The rest of the claims made by Islamic fundamentalists was that the game promoted Darwin's theory of evolution or even Freemasonry beliefs. But how does this differ to the reaction of the Christian community? Well, the Vatican decided the only sin from Pokemon was that it was a weird game, whereas Saudi Arabia decided to ban it entirely. It even passed a fatwa or a religious law to cement this. However, it did not last since Pokemon still found its way to infiltrate Saudi Arabia, and the fatwa was largely forgotten with time. These were the 15 biggest controversies in Pokemon. Let me know what you guys think of these by joining my Discord down below.